Green IT. In this nugget, we examine a really hot methodology in information technology now in the 21st century. By the conclusion of this nugget, you're going to understand what green IT means, what it is, what its ramifications are, and you'll also know two main principles behind green IT, namely the hows and whys of responsible disposal of computer equipment, as well as the basics of power preservation. I thank you very much. Without any further ado, let's get to work. What is green IT? If you do much reading online or in print publications in information technology, it's almost impossible not to stumble across this term. Similarly, in the computer bookstore or Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, wherever you shop for computer books, you'll find entire boutique collections focusing on green IT. Green IT is also called green computing. According to wikipedia.org, green computing is defined as the study and practice of designing, manufacturing, using, and disposing of computers, servers, and associated subsystems like monitors, printers, storage devices, networking components, etc., efficiently and effectively with minimal or no impact on the environment. So the kernel, the take-home message is green IT deals with the subject of minimizing computing's impact on the environment as a whole. To that end, in the USA, we have the Energy Star certification. In Europe, there's the TCO certification. They're very similar in terms of publishing standards or benchmarks. For instance, with Energy Star, dealing with reducing the power consumption of high-output computing devices like monitors. If you have an Energy Star compliant monitor or flat panel television, then you can rest assured that that manufacturer has downloaded or looked at the Energy Star guidelines and made sure to fit their hardware to reduce its power consumption. Energy Star was created in the Clinton administration in the U.S. in 1992. However, the European Union, Australia, Canada, Japan, Taiwan, and New Zealand have also adopted the program as well. And the specifications for the Energy Star program cover not just computers and servers and computing appliances, but also heating and cooling systems, home electronics, lighting, home office equipment, and even new homes. You see? So it's a pretty far-reaching specification, an international standard it is. As I said, though, many European targeted products use an alternate certification system called the TCO certification. This is developed in Sweden. TCO actually is a Swedish term. I don't even know how to pronounce it, quite honestly, but the acronym stands for Central Organization of Salaried Employees. And TCO started as a low-emission standard for computer displays, power management features, etc., and then it's expanded to CRT monitors, system units. They cover things like ergonomics, emissions, energy, ecology. It's good stuff. For the purposes of our exam, however, we're good with simply understanding what green IT is in a general sense, and that the two main certification programs in the world are Energy Star and TCO. The first aspect of green IT that we'll look at in this nugget is that of responsible disposal of computer hardware. And you'll see that I've structured this whiteboard with main subsystems in mind. First of all, what is so problematic or potentially problematic about simply taking decommissioned computer hardware to your local landfill and dropping it off? Well, the problem with that is that, unfortunately, many hardware components contain hazardous substances that we definitely do not want to leach into the ground, potentially hit water sources, give off bad emissions, etc. You have things like lead, various acids, remnants of cleaning products. Heck, some folks will actually not only simply throw away their computer hardware, but also, in some cases, very abrasive and dangerous cleaning products as well. We want to responsibly dispose of this stuff, absolutely. Speaking of lead and acids, laptop batteries definitely are at the top of the list. You'll recall earlier in this series we also talked about battery backup units, or UPSs. Those are other pieces of hardware that we want to be careful to dispose of properly. Now, when you're thinking of IT, in my experience as an IT manager, the responsible disposal piece can be handled based on your contract. In other words, I once worked in a private high school here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I live, and everyone's desktop computer, all of the administrative staff everyone except the teachers and students, had a desktop PC on their desk that was not purchased by the school, but instead was on a lease cycle. I don't remember how many years it was offhand, maybe 2 or 3 years, with the OEM or original equipment manufacturer, such that at the end of that lease cycle, the OEM accepted back all of that hardware, and then we had the option to get new upgraded PCs to replace the old ones. There we don't have to worry about disposal. Similarly, the students in the school were all given laptop computers. Periodically, there are recalls for batteries as various problems crop up. In fact, during my tenure at that particular institution, we did have a product recall on batteries and had to retrieve all students' batteries, swap them out for replacement models, and safely and securely transfer the defective batteries back to the OEM. You can do research on this, but the standard lifetime of a laptop battery is approximately 4 years. And when a battery goes kaput and you replace it, please don't just throw the old battery into the trash. Send it back to the OEM. Almost guaranteed that OEM has a recycling program. In many cases, the OEM will even comp the shipping for you to make it easier for you to do. So please consider that. Another category are cathode ray tube monitors. The old school monitors, really big, really heavy, really clunky. When they're decommissioned in an organization, an IT manager is faced with, oh boy, now I have this stockroom filled to the brim with these CRTs. Can't I just take them to the landfill? Why do we have to horse around with them? I mean, it's a good thing. At least most IT managers think it's a good thing to get rid of old hardware because it can be considered a tax write-off if it's a donation. Well, guess what? Take those old CRTs, take those old computer main cases, bring them to a recycling center and get a receipt to make sure you get that donation tax credit. Green IT you'll find when you get into the literature, and like I said earlier, there's a growing body of literature on the subject of green computing. Often ties into incentivizing IT managers, most often with the idea of something like I just said, a tax rebate, to give them some additional impotence besides just the ethics of the thing to responsibly dispose of computer hardware. For instance, in my town again of Nashville, Tennessee, our local university, Vanderbilt University, regularly, several times a year, opens their doors to hardware recycling such that you can just drive on down as an individual getting rid of an old system, or even as a business owner, you may have a truck filled with old CRTs and old cases, etc., and the university recycling center will take those off your hands for you and dispose of them in a green way or an environmentally sustainable way. Now, this brings up an important issue, especially when we're talking about the main case of a PC that has, as you know, one or more hard drives inside. One reason why some IT managers are hesitant to recycle or donate their decommissioned hardware is the fact that hard drives retain their data even after the drive has been erased. I mean, you probably remember seeing news stories that happen periodically every few years. I remember one where the Pentagon or some national U.S. governmental agency had disposed of a lot of computer hardware. Literally, I don't know if they recycled it or just literally dropped it off at a landfill. Some citizen found this hardware, figured, free PC for parts, extracted the hard drives, and was able to get a lot of potentially, I'm not sure how damaging, but certainly data that citizen didn't have any right to see. Now, how can you as an IT administrator obviate that? Well, if you have the time, you can do what's called a secure erase. That takes a little bit of time, like I said, and it can be tedious if you have a lot of computers that you're considering recycling. But what a hard erase or a secure erase does is not only blank the drive, which, as I said, and we don't have the time or scope to go into it in much more detail, but when you format a hard drive, you're really simply marking that drive space as being able to be overwritten. But any data that's actually on there is there just as if it were visible. It isn't until you do a secure erase, which covers up the pre-existing data with random zeros and ones, that the drive becomes truly unrecoverable. What I've seen some colleagues do in industry to securely get rid of computers is simply extract the hard drives, donate the shell of the computer, and then literally take a drill or a hammer to each of those hard drive units to physically deform them. You remember when we talked about the ATA drive standard or the mechanical drive standard? Those magnetic plates are extremely fragile. So a few whacks of a hammer, and I don't care who you are, you're not going to be able to pull any data from there. So what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is that green IT has never been easier to do. Now, of course, when you're doing the right thing ethically like this, it's going to be a little bit of a pinch. It's never as easy, for instance, as just taking an old CRT, throwing it in the dumpster, and then going back to get yourself a new cup of coffee. But it's a good thing. And frankly, above all else, we need to understand these things in order to pass the CompTIA Strata IT for Sales exam. Another subsystem is that of toner, especially in businesses that rely upon laser printers. These laser printers transfer the toner to the page to give you your output, obviously. Well, what happens when that toner cartridge is empty? When it's empty, it's not truly empty. The inside of the cylinder is still coated with toner residue. Toner is a biohazardous material. You absolutely want to avoid breathing in those toner particles. I've found in my experience again that recycling is the order of the day. In particular, if an IT manager can get in a contract with a printer provider or maybe just a toner provider, you can have them come and drop off refilled toner cartridges at your office and pick up any empties. And there you go. You're doing green IT, and you always have a stock of refurbished toner cartridges. You're saving yourself money that way as well, instead of just purchasing new toner cartridges on an as-needed basis. Finally, for your Strata IT for Sales exam in the Green IT section, you need to just understand what RoHS or RoHS means. There's lots of different ways to pronounce this. This stands for the Restriction of Hazardous Substances Directive, and it's a European Union-based set of rules. From Wikipedia, it's a directive on the restriction of the uses of certain hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment. Specifically, the directive restricts the use of lead, mercury, cadmium, hexavalent chromium, polybrominated biphenyls, and polybrominated diphenyl ether, say that 5 times quickly, in the use of computer equipment. Not only covering computer equipment, we're also talking about large and small household appliances, lighting equipment including light bulbs, electronic and electrical tools, etc. Now here in the USA there is some RoHS testing going on, but there's also just as many people, especially as you can imagine, those who work as electricians or in the electronics industry, who push back against some of these rules or some of these directives. Let's now go out onto the web to look at some of this stuff. If you're interested in learning more about the RoHS, rohs.gov.uk, so obviously this enforcement authority is in the United Kingdom. You can learn about that. Remember I mentioned that in the US there's some pushback. There's actually rohsusa.com that's called pushback, and this individual named John Burke put up the site who cannot understand why the European Parliament has seen fit to effectively ban lead in electronic solders, forcing the industry to use much less environmentally friendly alternatives. You'll find as you get into green IT that it is a very, shall we say, hot button or controversial topic, because you have extremists on both ends. That is, those that are really into green IT everything, and then you'll have those who consider themselves more practical, who feel that there needs to be a balance between usability of these components and the threat to the environment. I also wanted to take you out to CompTIA.org to let you know, if you don't know already, that there is a CompTIA Strata certificate for green IT. So you can actually certify in this technology. So let's see what CompTIA has to say. That the green IT exam will validate the following skills: specialized knowledge of current IT methodologies. Well, you're getting a lot of that in this training for Strata IT for Sales. The ability to develop, deploy, and calculate true return on investment for green IT initiatives. Remember, I mentioned several minutes ago that a lot of pushing green IT and fostering acceptance and buy-in is convincing IT decision makers what's in it for them. The notion of return on investment. The green IT also validates knowledge of cost-cutting, power management, and IT virtualization techniques. Again, cost-cutting is a key word for many IT managers. The notion of environmentally sustainable computing and reducing your energy footprint for energy conservation's sake, I hate to say it, but it's just human nature, may not be enough to foster that buy-in with all parties. So we can cater to the bottom line and make a good business argument for green IT initiatives. Proven understanding of environmentally sound waste disposal, we're learning about that in this nugget, aren't we? And then finally, an awareness of global organizations mandating standards and regulations. ROHS being one of them, Energy Star, TCO, we're covering that too. In case you haven't noticed, there is some overlap, quite a bit actually, among the three skill sets that comprise the CompTIA Strata certificate portfolio. Don't be put off by that. That's actually very common in IT certification. In point of fact, if you look at the other CompTIA certification programs, for instance, their most popular ones, A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, you're likely to see a very high degree of overlap. Not only within the title, A+, for instance, requires that you pass 2 certification exams. There's a great deal of overlap between those. But even with A+, and Network Plus, there are networking areas of the A+ skill set, and there are some computer hardware and computer troubleshooting issues that come up in the Network Plus and Security Plus skill sets that you might think belong with A+. Remember, IT is kind of a multi-headed beast, so to speak. If you do a Google search or a Bing search for green IT and environmental computing, green computing, you'll come across many useful websites, some run by universities. Universities, the larger the better, tend to be more proactive about appropriate disposal of computer equipment. This is a website called computerhope.com that I think is pretty useful because it gives you a lot of useful background on things like organizational notice of recycling, specifics about recycling batteries. Remember I mentioned hard drives and the potential security problem there, computer dismantling instructions, monitor dismantling, which frankly I hope you never would do, especially a CRT monitor that contains lead and a huge energy capacitor that can zap you to death potentially, information on computer donation, recycling printer, ink, and toner, and then even environmentally sustainable cleaning computer components. This is a really good reference site for you to look at. Our final subject in this nugget is that of power preservation. I don't know why the heck I get this wrong. It's one of those things where your brain is on one track and your writing hand is on the other. How about I just use pres to cut my losses? Anyway, we need to understand, first of all, power options and common operating systems that are basically the same, regardless of whether we're running a new version of Windows, say Windows 7, Mac OS 10, or Linux. We're concerned with the difference between sleep, hibernate, and disk spin down. Actually, first let's just look at the differentiation between sleep, sometimes also called standby mode, and hibernation. First of all, you need to understand that fundamentally the power options deal with the underlying hardware, don't they? In particular, the motherboard. How power friendly is your system? Does it support the advanced configuration power interface and/or advanced power management standards? Chances are, absolutely, the motherboard does support those. In other words, it supports the ability to put the computer in a low power state. That's really what sleep or standby mode is. When you put your computer to sleep, there's still power running in the system. The monitor is still turned on, albeit there's no obvious screen output, and the system's running in a very low power trickle. Now, it's one thing to put your desktop computer in sleep or standby mode. It's another to do that with your laptop computer. At first blush, a lot of people think that power options really only pertain to laptop or notebook computers because, of course, we have the notion of battery power and wanting to conserve battery life. I would argue that power options are just as important in a desktop computing environment. There's a lot of really good research papers out there that can show you as IT decision makers how much money and energy bills you can save each year if, for instance, your employees put their computers to sleep and, in particular, turn off their monitors. Now that monitors have gone into the flat screen LCD era, they're consuming less power than ever before. This was much more of an issue with those great big honking CRT monitors that sucked a great deal of power. And if you have your employees leaving their systems on overnight, and in particular their monitors on overnight, you're spending a lot more in energy than you really have to, okay? So keep power options in mind, both for desktop and mobile computers. To get back to sleep or standby mode, this is recommended for notebook computer users when they're not going to use their computer for several hours. But on the other hand, if the user wants to put his or her laptop up on the shelf, for instance, for a weekend or longer, they should not use sleep or standby, but instead should use hibernation. The reason for this is as follows. In sleep or standby, as I said, the system's in a very low power mode, but it still is trickling power. Therefore, a laptop computer that's running on battery and in sleep mode will eventually run out of battery juice and the system will just go down. Therefore, any RAM memory contents, you may have open documents up and some unsaved work, all of that goes up the flue. Not a good deal. Hibernation, on the other hand, at first blush looks like sleep or standby mode, because it's a mechanism for being able to put down the computer temporarily and then bring it up a lot faster than doing an actual cold boot, okay? Hibernation, though, actually does this. It's very interesting. It takes everything that's in memory on that system, open documents, open windows, anything that's in RAM, the desktop environment, packs it all down into a file on the system's hard drive, and then the computer does indeed shut off completely. So a laptop in hibernate will not run out of battery juice because there's literally nothing going on. Most current laptops, you can tell whether they're in sleep mode or not because there'll be a little LED on the side of the case that sometimes glows. A lot of times it'll pulse. It'll go brighter, then it'll go dimmer, then it'll go brighter, etc. to let you know that it's in sleep mode. When it's in hibernate, the state of the computer is identical to that of being truly powered off, because that is what happens. Hibernate's neat, though, because when you hit the power button on the desktop or laptop computer, you get a much faster, quote-unquote, startup than you do than when you're just doing a real system startup by punching the power button and letting a cold boot happen. But check this out. Hibernation will unpack all of the RAM contents from the hard disk and put everything back on screen the way it was prior to the hibernation event. Takes longer to wake up from hibernate than sleep. That stands to reason. You also need to have sufficient space on your system's hard drive to store all of those RAM contents. And the amount of space that's necessary is, logic would tell you, and you'd be right in thinking this, the amount of system RAM that's installed on that machine. Therefore, if I have a laptop computer that has 8 gigabytes of RAM, then my hibernate file is always going to be 8 gigabytes in size. Even if I'm not using the full 8 gigs, the hibernate file still is sized to your RAM. Therefore, a power tip is, if you're not going to use hibernate, say on a desktop computer, go into the Power Options control panel and turn it off and save yourself potentially a significant amount of hard disk space. Now, with reference to Microsoft operating systems, they have drastically revamped their Power Options control panel in between Windows XP and then Windows Vista, and then, of course, on to Windows 7. But the basic ideas are the same. What you're seeing is the Power Options control panel item from a Windows XP computer. And we'll just go through these very briefly. You should understand what's going on now. Notice that we have the ability to turn off the monitor physically after a certain period of inactivity. We have the ability to spin down the hard disks after a certain amount of inactivity. And then we could possibly just put the system to sleep as a whole after, again, a certain amount of inactivity. Now, what's this deal with hard disks? This deals not with solid-state disks, but with mechanical ATA hard drives with those magnetic platters, as we've talked about several times thus far. You're going to decrease the lifetime of your hard disk by not turning off those hard disks or spinning them down when the computer is inactive. If you let your system stay up full power all the time, those platters are spinning and spinning. It sounds like gerbils running on exercise wheels if you put your ear up to the computer case. You're increasing the mean time before failure value of that hard drive. So it's a good idea to spin those down when you're not using them. I also wanted to show you this. If your motherboard supports hibernation, you can turn it on or off just with a click of the mouse, and you notice that my system has 4 gigs of RAM, although it's listed as 3.3 gigs. And it tells us right here that if I enable hibernation, the disk space required to hibernate is going to be the amount of RAM. Simple as that. There's also an uninterruptible power supply tab in the Windows XP Power Options. I always recommend, though, that you install the UPS software that comes with your device device. You'll get greater flexibility and customization by doing that. Moving on with power preservation, printing is another potentially very energy consumptive practice. So the idea here is if we can use less paper, less toner, we're going to drive down our printing costs and increase our energy efficiency because the printer is being used less often. In particular, if you have the ability to duplex print, so much the better. Duplex is printing on both sides of the page, and that instantly cuts in half your paper consumption. Doesn't do much as far as toner goes. To conserve toner, you as a systems administrator can tweak the printing settings and maybe change the quality. Maybe a particular work group in your organization doesn't need the best or high quality printing. Maybe they can get by with medium or even draft. You see what I mean? Finally, in terms of hard disks, solid-state drives are the way to go with regard to green computing. No moving parts means we don't have to worry about sleeping the device like we do with ATA hard drives. And as I've stated several times before, solid-state drives also consume far less power than their mechanical counterparts. Easier to dispose of solid-state drives as well. There's just less there. It's just flash memory in some kind of plastic or metal case. Green IT review. In this nugget, you now should understand what Green IT is, what some of the main standards bodies behind the Green IT movement are, and you should know some of the basic mechanics of Green IT in terms of responsible disposal of computer hardware as well as power preservation. At this point, you're fully prepared to answer correctly any questions you receive on this subject on your Strata IT for Sales exam. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.